Well, of course, the neighborhood is changed a lot. I mean, when I was, you know, a young boy, uh, Summer Street, for example, where I lived for the first 10 years of my life, was the Collinses across the street were the only ones on the street had a telephone, and my father was the only person on the street had a car, believe it or not. And there was across the street there was the Collinses, and then the next door was the Turgeons, which was a boarding house, and she used to have people used to take meals in there at noontime. A lot of the people that worked in the tanneries would come up for their noon meal there. And the next door was Nelson's. And next door to that was the house that's torn down now was Miss O'Keefe on the first floor, and Hannah Horrigan and her husband and her brother upstairs, and then the Gibbonses next door, and then the Nelsons the next house, and then this house across the street was they were. The house was owned by the Karans, but they rented to, it was, they were Ukrainians. They were, trying to think of their names. She was one of the daughters was a nurse, and the father was sawing wood all the time. They burnt wood all winter in a furnace, and he was constantly sawing wood. And the one that was the nurse, there was a two-car garage in the back here, and she used to rent one of the garages to park her car in. I can't think of the name, but on this side of the house there was, believe it or not, there's at the end of the street, before the post office was built down there was the Rome Motor, which was at the end of the street, was the Ford agency, the Rome Motor. And then there was a house next door to where we lived, there was number 8, there was a house, well, there was a company, there was a woman by the name of Campbell lived in there, but the house was owned by Curtis, who was the president of the bank, and there was Arthur Barry's wife. Arthur Barry was the principal of the high school, and he was married to Marie Curtis, who was the daughter of the president of the bank, and she would come every Saturday afternoon to collect the rent from this Campbell who rented rooms in there. And then there was our house, 10 Summer Street, and then there was the Baptist Church, and then the house next door was Murphy's. And there was Joe Murphy lived in there and his wife, but there was a brother that was a Jesuit priest that taught down in a college down in Connecticut, but he'd come home once in a while on a vacation to be there. And then there was the church here, but that church has a hall in back, and they used to have in the fall they'd have flower shows in there and all. And now, of course, they get condominiums in there now, but when I was a young kid, this church, they would have they were very well-to-do Yankees that owned this, and they would be chauffeur-driven packets that would come up here and drop people, up on Sunday morning. The bells would ring, and they'd have every day, every week the janitor would change the reading in front. There'd be a scripture reading put in a billboard in front here, and we always could get a kick out of it because they would have they closed for the summer though, for a month or so. We always got a kick out of it, closed for the summer, you know. But they would, there was a, you know, big stone there that which we would put there in the horse-driven days, and where they'd get out and, you know, that stone. But you know, that it was a very well-to-do place. But then after the war, you know, what because a lot of the old timers had died off, and it was a well-endowed church, and the young people that had inherited it took over, took the endowment and built a church up on the Danvers-Topsfield border. So, and then they sold this thing to the Galdowski Opera Company, which, oh, that was a tough period, I'll tell you. And they used it just for storage. And they would come in here with a trailer truck, and, you know, on a Sunday afternoon after they'd had a show somewhere, you know, anywhere in the country, and they'd come in with 1 or 2 trailer trucks on a winter day, and they'd be taking the props and things like, they'd be here for 3 or 4 hours with the diesel engines running, and, you know, they'd asphyxiate you. We'd be calling the cops, you know, and they'd say, and the cops would come and and they'd be blocking off the street, and big trailer trucks, you know, 18-wheelers, and the cops would say, move over, or get out of here, or shut off those engines, you know. And they'd say, we'll freeze to death, you know. And the cops would say, I don't give a damn if you freeze or not. You can't just run these and asphyxiate these people. You know, we'd be calling here. It was terrible, you know. And it was, and at one point, you know, they were putting wire on the windows here on the plane because, you know, kids would be throwing rocks at the windows. It was terrible. But it went on and on and on until finally, you know, Bresnahan and this Greek guy, he owns a building down on Winter Street here, bought the thing and built these condos, you know. But it lasted for 5 or 6 years, but it was a terrible period of time, you know. And then this thing over here, there was a guy by the name of, he was a doozy. He was a Russian guy, and he had, at one point, he had 12 apartments in his house. And he kind of, he had them in the cellar and everything else. And finally, he sold it to some other guy who was, you know, who was a friendly graduate, and he came from Swampscott. And he was worse than the other guy that had originally, who he bought it from. And it was a cash cow, you know. He was, you know, and I don't know how the hell they ever got away with it, you know, with the health department. Finally, there was a fire in there, and thank God nobody was ever hurt in it. Finally, the Board of Health just closed the whole thing down, and there was some bank up in Maine had the mortgages on it, and finally, it was idle for a long, long time until finally Habitat for Humanity's come along and bought the place and started, you know, fixed the whole thing up, you know, thank God. So, but I mean, the whole area has been gentrified now, thank God, you know. But it's gone from a situation where it was one of the best neighborhoods, you know. When I was a kid, there was a lot of trees on the whole neighborhood. I mean, and here, there was a big horse chestnut tree right here, big elm tree. There were 2 trees right in front of the house. And so, any other avenues you want to?
Do you have any specific